Buried in the shadows of history are stories no nation dares admit. Sealed vaults, vanished trains, laboratories carved into stone where men became test subjects and machines outlived their makers. The archives whisper of weapons that never reached the battlefield, secrets traded in silence, and experiments erased with gunfire and rubble. These are not legends, but the fragments of truth that slipped through censorship, truth that suggests the war never truly ended, only disappeared underground. On April 28, 1945, less than 2 days before Hitler's suicide, the 79th Infantry Division advanced into central Berlin. Amid the charred ruins of Wilhelmstrasse, a forward unit stumbled upon a steel door partially buried under rubble. It was, unlike the standard air raid shelters scattered throughout the capital. The entrance bore the inscription, Projekt Morgenrot, Morning Red. The name alone meant nothing to the exhausted soldiers, but inside they would find remnants of something far beyond the known war effort. The underground complex extended 3 levels beneath the surface, its corridors reinforced with concrete, far thicker than anything standard Wehrmacht engineering dictated. The air stank of scorched wiring, machine oil, and burned paper. Wooden crates lay smashed open, their contents, spools of film reels and rolled blueprints, scattered across the floor. In the largest chamber, half collapsed from an explosion, stood the skeletal remains of an aircraft fuselage. Unlike the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters the Allies had already encountered, this frame featured an elongated, almost disc-like airframe with ventral intakes resembling turbine mouths. The soldiers, untrained in aeronautics, could not comprehend what they had found. They reported it simply as an unidentified plane. Within hours, an American technical intelligence detachment arrived, men from what would later be absorbed into the T-Force missions. According to a debrief filed in early May 1945, Major Thomas A. Green ordered the site sealed and photographed. The blueprints, marked with Reichsluftfahrtministerium (RLM) stamps, carried a classification of Geheime, Kommandosache, top secret command matter. Their titles included Antriebsmodul, Morgenrot, A9D, and Langstrecken Träger platform. The technical jargon implied a propulsion system beyond the Jumo 004 turbojets then in use. Notes scribbled in pencil suggested speeds exceeding Mach 1, a figure regarded as impossible at the time. One fragment of film reel survived enough to be reviewed. Stored later in a US Army crate under reference BR-45 6012, it depicts a test range outside Peenemünde late 1944. A prototype fuselage mounted atop a modified V2 booster is seen lifting from the launch pad. The footage cuts abruptly after ignition, though a short annotation mentions uncontrolled crash into the Baltic. No further records of a successful flight exist. By July 1945, Morgenrot files had been transferred under Operation Lusty, the US program for seizing German aviation secrets. The leading engineers, whose names appear in a redacted personnel list recovered decades later, were not prosecuted at Nuremberg. Instead, they reappeared in American employment under Operation Paperclip, resettled at Wright Field in Ohio. Among them was Dr. Heinrich Lenz, a propulsion specialist never indicted despite documented SS affiliation. His 1947 testimony, recorded in heavily censored transcripts, refers cryptically to the transition drive and continental range strike capability. British intelligence, meanwhile, filed a parallel report, catalogued as AIR-40 3021, warning of a potential strategic bomber system capable of reaching New York from Central Europe. The language was speculative, but reflected genuine alarm. The report was shelved by 1946, dismissed as improbable given Germany's collapse. Yet fragments of Morgenrot technology resurfaced throughout the 1950s. Declassified RAND Corporation papers make oblique references to inherited Axis propulsion, concepts influencing early American supersonic bomber designs. Rumors within Soviet archives add a darker layer. A captured German officer, interrogated at Krasnogorsk in September 1945, claimed the Morgenrot prototypes were not simply manned aircraft, but platforms intended for payload delivery across oceans. Whether conventional or nuclear payloads was left unspecified. The Soviet interrogators concluded the testimony unverifiable. Still, by 1952, Soviet test pilots were reportedly briefed on German blueprints describing similar high-speed designs. By the early 1960s, Morgenrot had dissolved into whispers of classified aerospace projects. Aviation enthusiasts speculated its designs informed the North American X-15 or the Dinosaur spaceplane program. Official denials always followed, yet one peculiar entry in a 1967 Air Force logistics file notes examination of Morgenrot frame, fragments stored at Wright-Patterson AFB, Hangar 18. Whether the aircraft remains intact or was scrapped is unknown. The surviving American soldiers who first stumbled into the bunker never spoke publicly. A private letter written by Corporal James Harrington in June 1945, declassified only in 1998, describes the fuselage vividly. A plane that looked like no plane, curved and wide like a plate, wires and pipes torn out as if they ripped it apart themselves. He claimed the engineers on site forbade photographs, threatening court-martial. Today, the exact location of the Morgenrot bunker in Berlin remains obscured. Allied maps list its coordinates, but the site was bombed heavily in May 1945 and subsequently demolished during Soviet occupation. No structural remains are visible on the surface. Yet construction records from 1939 show a reinforced sub-basement beneath the Reich Air Ministry, a section never accounted for after the war. Historians remain divided. Some insist Morgenrot was little more than a paper project, exaggerated by the desperate Reich as the walls closed in. Others believe it represented a genuine attempt to develop a transatlantic strike platform, a last-ditch weapon meant to threaten the United States directly. The absence of a surviving prototype ensures uncertainty. In 2003, a partially declassified Freedom of Information Act release confirmed the existence of Projekt Morgenrot documentation reels, transferred to Foreign Technology Division, Wright-Patterson, AFB, May 1946. The final line of the file is telling: reels 1 to 5 accounted for, reels 6 to 9 missing. What those missing reels contained remains unanswerable. But if the footage showed more than failed test launches, if they captured a working system, the story of World War II's final days may still be incomplete. The truth lies buried beneath layers of redaction, filed away under projects whose very names remain unknown. And yet, scattered testimonies, half-burned blueprints, and whispered references suggest that somewhere, fragments of Projekt Morgenrot may still linger in silence, pieces of a weapon that never officially existed, born in the ashes of Berlin, erased in the dawn of the Cold War. On the night of November 12, 1943, a heavily guarded train departed Breslau under direct orders from the Reich Main Security Office. Its codename was Sonderzug Nachtwind, Special Train Night Wind. According to the surviving Wehrmacht manifest, the convoy consisted of 12 cars, 2 passenger coaches, 3 flatbeds, and 7 lead-lined cargo wagons sealed with wax emblems of the SS Totenkopfverbände. Its destination was recorded as Görlitz, but the train was never registered at any subsequent station along the Lower Silesian line. From that night forward, Nachtwind disappeared from the official record. Initial Allied interest in the case emerged only after the war. In 1946, the US Counterintelligence Corps interviewed multiple Polish railway workers who claimed to have seen the train passing Zgorzelec under unusual escort. Armed SS troops with Geiger counters visibly strapped to their chests. One witness, a station operator named Kazimierz Nowak, described the men's anxious behavior. They would not approach the cars without gloves, and when the counters clicked too high, they shouted to increase speed. Nowak was later arrested by Soviet security forces. His testimony survives only in a handwritten transcript smuggled to the West in 1954. Soviet archives opened in the 1990s revealed additional details. An NKVD file dated February 2, 1945, notes interception orders issued for a German transport, believed to carry uranium oxide or comparable radiological materials. The order was classified under Osobaya Papka, the Kremlin's highest security category. The file states that Soviet rail units attempted to locate Nachtwind east of Rockwall, but found only derailed track sections and burned wagons. Whether these belonged to Nachtwind or were deliberate decoys remains uncertain. Western intelligence, meanwhile, quietly tracked Nachtwind's traces through scattered documents. A 1947 CIA memorandum, declassified in part, lists the train under the heading Unrecovered Axis Energy Assets. The report speculates the cargo was sufficient to advance fissile material development by 2 to 3 years. This aligns with intercepted German correspondence from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, referring cryptically to the Nightwind delivery. By 1950, US analysts were convinced that the train carried either raw uranium or components of a nuclear reactor system dismantled from experimental sites in Silesia. What makes Nachtwind particularly haunting is its absence of conclusion. In 1961, during the height of the Berlin crisis, a Soviet defector known as Source 112 claimed that the train's cargo had been successfully seized and relocated to Arzamas 16, the Soviet nuclear weapons research facility. His statement, however, contradicts other records suggesting the shipment never reached Soviet control. British intelligence, through declassified MI6 reports, noted that Soviet nuclear scientists in 1946 still struggled with fissile purification, a problem that Nachtwind's capture should have resolved. Local folklore in Poland and Lower Silesia offers another perspective. Residents of Wałbrzych speak of sealed tunnels beneath the Owl Mountains, where SS engineers had excavated vast chambers under Projekt WWII. Oral accounts suggest Nachtwind was driven into one such tunnel and detonated deliberately, burying its contents. In 1972, Polish mining crews reported abnormally high radiation levels near an abandoned shaft in that region, prompting a classified survey by Warsaw Pact engineers. No official results were released, but the mine was permanently sealed under military guard. Scattered evidence points to continuing interest from NATO during the Cold War. A declassified US Army document dated 1968 references Project Windfall, describing reconnaissance flights over Lower Silesia, seeking evidence of radiological anomalies consistent with concealed transport remnants. The document confirms elevated readings in the Owl Mountains, but concludes that excavation was politically untenable given the Soviet presence. The personal stories are equally unsettling. In 1983, a former Soviet railway officer named Anatoly Chernov gave a recorded interview in Leningrad, later smuggled to the West. He claimed to have overseen a sealed train arriving in Vladivostok in late 1944. According to him, the wagons were heavily guarded and emitted a constant humming sound, like electricity. Chernov was told the shipment originated from Germany. If true, this suggests Nachtwind, or at least part of its cargo, completed an impossible journey across Siberia, though no corroborating documents exist. One particularly disturbing link surfaced in Korea, 1950. During the early months of the war, US intelligence units documented sudden radiation-related illnesses among troops stationed near Yongdong. The source was never determined, though a declassified medical report notes isotopic traces not typical of natural contamination. Some historians now speculate this was a covert Soviet field test of captured Nachtwind materials. What remains, undeniable, is that Nachtwind continues to cast a long shadow. Despite exhaustive searches by treasure hunters, historians, and intelligence agencies, no physical trace of the train has ever been confirmed. Yet the volume of references in German, Soviet, and American records leaves little doubt of its existence. The question is not whether Nachtwind ran, but where it ended. In 2015, Polish construction crews excavating near Wałbrzych reported the discovery of a sealed tunnel containing what ground-penetrating radar suggested were several large metallic objects consistent with railcars. The Polish government swiftly intervened, sealing the site and denying excavation. Official statements declared the anomaly to be geological in nature. Independent geologists who reviewed the scans disagreed, claiming the signatures aligned with man-made structures. Access remains prohibited. If Nachtwind lies entombed beneath the Owl Mountains, its cargo may still rest in silence, 70 feet below the Earth. Uranium, reactor components, or something more obscure. If it was seized by the Soviets, its influence echoes in the arms race that defined the Cold War. If it reached Vladivostok, as Chernoff alleged, then its journey rewrote the trajectory of nuclear history. But the most unsettling possibility remains, the simplest, that Nachtwind vanished completely, swallowed by war and conspiracy, leaving only whispers of its existence. A train without a station, a cargo without an owner, its name carried only in scattered files stamped classified. The night wind blew once across Europe, and then was gone. In April 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, a retreating Luftwaffe detachment abandoned a fortified airfield outside Mostar, Yugoslavia. After the war, the site lay dormant, its runways overgrown and hangars gutted by fire. But in 1949, Yugoslav engineers surveying the ruins for redevelopment discovered a sealed underground chamber. Inside were crates of water-damaged documents bearing the insignia of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium and stamped with the code Projekt Seeschlange, Sea Serpent. The recovered materials describe not conventional aircraft, but something far more unusual. Long-range, unmanned submarine drones intended for covert strikes against Allied ports. The blueprints, though incomplete, detailed a hybrid vessel, part torpedo, part remote-controlled boat, capable of carrying explosives across thousands of nautical miles. It was a chilling innovation, combining radio guidance with gyro compass navigation, and powered by compact diesel units that could run for weeks. Marginal notes, scrawled in German cursive, referred to deployments from secret pens in Norway and Baltic trials, summer 1944. No prototype was found at Mostar, but the documents suggested construction had begun at several coastal facilities. British intelligence first became aware of Seeschlange in 1950, when fragments of the Yugoslav cache were quietly handed to MI6. Declassified reports filed under ADM 239-1140 reveal internal debate within the Admiralty. Some dismissed the designs as impractical, others noted alarming parallels to unexplained wartime incidents. One such case was the mysterious sinking of HMS Patia in April 1941, originally attributed to an aerial attack. Later reviews suggested impact patterns inconsistent with conventional bombs, patterns that eerily matched Seeschlange's proposed warhead delivery. The Americans also took an interest. CIA documents from 1952, unearthed decades later, reveal Project Tidal, a secret study of the Seeschlange papers at the Naval Ordnance Test Station in California. Engineers reconstructed scale models and concluded that with modest improvements, the Germans could indeed have fielded operational units by 1946. Notes from the project speculate on the possibility that one or more prototypes had already been deployed in the Atlantic in late 1944. No definitive evidence was cited, but references to unidentified sonar contacts near Halifax, January 1945, were included. For the Soviets, the find was equally compelling. A captured German officer, interrogated by Smersh in Prague, claimed that 2 Seeschlange hulls were secretly tested from Kiel in February 1945. According to his testimony, one prototype failed during launch, but the other disappeared into the North Sea and was never recovered. Whether this was fabrication or fact remains unresolved, though Soviet naval archives list anomalous hydroacoustic signatures detected in March 1945 off Murmansk, consistent with a low-profile submersible. The Cold War fueled the myth further. In 1957, during NATO exercises in the North Atlantic, US destroyers reported chasing a ghost contact that moved irregularly, faster than conventional submarines of the era, yet leaving no wake. The incident, filed under Exercise Strike Back, anomalous sonar reports, was quietly suppressed. Some analysts later linked it to possible Seeschlange derivatives, speculating that fragments of German technology had been smuggled into Soviet research. Civilian accounts deepened the mystery. Fishermen along the Norwegian coast told stories of metal whales sighted during the final months of the war, objects surfacing briefly at dusk before vanishing beneath the waves. In 1963, a trawler off Bergen reportedly snagged an unusual, metallic object on its nets. Norwegian naval divers retrieved fragments described as aluminum alloy casings with unfamiliar rivet patterns. The material was removed under military guard, never returned. The Yugoslav documents themselves vanished into NATO custody by the early 1960s, their existence publicly denied. Yet an internal Yugoslav military report, declassified in 1991 after the country's dissolution, included photographs taken before the handover, detailed schematics of a cigar-shaped craft roughly 10 meters long, with a blunt bow designed to detach as an explosive charge. Notations referred to Fernsteuerung, remote control, and Selbststeuerung, autonomous navigation. The technical plausibility of Seeschlange remains debated. Some historians argue that German radio control technology of the era lacked sufficient range for transatlantic use. Others point to advanced guidance systems already in German development, such as the Fritz X guided bomb and V1 autopilot, that could easily have been adapted. One particularly chilling annotation, translated from the Yugoslav find, reads, "Target, New York Harbor, estimated arrival 12 days. If Seeschlange was real, why no confirmed attacks? The most likely explanation is that the program remained incomplete, disrupted by the Reich's collapse. Yet unexplained naval incidents from 1944-45 suggest otherwise. The sinking of the Liberty ship, Elihu Washburn, near the Azores, attributed officially to U-boat action, occurred despite no recorded submarines within range. Survivors reported an impact that came from below without torpedo wake. Similar anomalies appear scattered across Allied naval logs. The afterlife of Seeschlange may be more unsettling. By the 1970s, both US and Soviet navies were experimenting with unmanned underwater vehicles, strikingly similar to the designs found in Mostar. The Soviets developed the Piranha mini-sub, while the Americans tested remote-controlled torpedoes at Otek in the Bahamas. Though officially credited to post-war innovation, whispers in defense circles suggest Seeschlange's ghost was always present. In 2008, divers exploring wreckage near Kristiansand discovered twisted metal fragments buried in silt. Metallurgical analysis indicated wartime German alloy. The shape, according to the dive report, did not match any known U-boat class. The Norwegian government classified the site, barring further dives. Today, Seeschlange remains a story, told in fragments, scattered files, lost blueprints, suppressed testimony. The idea of unmanned war machines prowling the Atlantic in 1945 is both terrifying and plausible. Whether prototypes were truly launched, or whether Seeschlange remained a blueprint that inspired Cold War navies, is a question buried beneath layers of secrecy. But the imagery persists, a silent, pilotless weapon sliding beneath the waves, guided only by crude circuits and compasses, programmed to surface in enemy harbors and detonate without warning. The Germans called it the Sea Serpent. For the men who hunted shadows on sonar screens long after the war ended, it was simply the contact that never answered back. In the final spring of the war, April 1945, Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted a series of encrypted transmissions between Berlin and Tokyo. The cipher was identified as Kurogane, iron. Unlike routine diplomatic traffic, the messages were routed through U-boat command channels, marked Nur für den Führer and signed by the Reich Main Security Office. Analysts quickly realized they were dealing with something unusual. References to biological material prepared for transoceanic transfer. The decoded fragments described preparations for loading sealed canisters aboard U-864, a Type 1D2 submarine stationed in Bergen, Norway. Historical records confirm U-864 sailed in February 1945, carrying engineers and advanced jet parts intended for Japan. But the Kurogane messages suggested its true mission was far darker: the delivery of weaponized pathogens to Imperial Japanese laboratories. The British Royal Navy sank U-864 off Fedje Island in March, but not before intelligence hinted that another submarine, U-234, carried the more sensitive cargo east. U-234's story is well known. It surrendered to the US Navy in May 1945. Its cargo revealed to include uranium oxide and advanced Mi-262 jet components. What was never publicized at the time were additional sealed containers, described in confiscation logs as medical supplies. Declassified US Navy documents from 1947 reveal that those containers were transferred under armed guard to Fort Detrick, Maryland, the hub of America's biological warfare program. Their contents were never listed. The Soviet archives paint a different picture. An NKVD memorandum dated October 1945 describes the interception of a German submarine near Vladivostok. Its crew, numbering fewer than 20, was executed immediately after capture. The cargo was described only as sealed cylinders, hazard markings unknown. Soviet records place the cylinders under the custody of Biopreparat, Moscow's clandestine bioweapons directorate. If the account is accurate, it suggests that multiple Kurogane shipments were launched, with some reaching their destination. The Japanese connection is no less disturbing. Imperial Unit 731, notorious for its human experimentation in Manchuria, is believed to have coordinated the request for German materials. Surviving testimony from a captured Japanese officer, declassified in 1956, states, "The German gift was to accelerate final projects. Iron shipments were essential." The officer, executed by Soviet authorities, never elaborated on the term iron. What lends weight to the story is the unexplained series of disease outbreaks during the Korean War. In the winter of 1951, US forces reported sudden clusters of hemorrhagic fever among frontline troops near Yeongdong. Initial medical reports described symptoms inconsistent with known endemic diseases. An internal army memorandum, long classified, raised the possibility of enemy use of non-standard agents. The suggestion was dismissed publicly, but the file includes a cryptic reference: possible Kurogane derivative, traced to captured Axis stocks. The US response to such suspicions was immediate silence. Witnesses who worked at Fort Detrick recalled sealed canisters arriving under heavy escort in 1946. Their origin described only as from Europe. Dr. Harold Graham, a microbiologist stationed there, later gave an interview in 1978, recalling, "The containers were lead-lined, marked with German script. We were told never to discuss them." Graham's testimony was ignored at the time, dismissed as paranoia, yet FOIA releases later confirmed shipments matching his account. Equally unsettling are the rumors of deliberate cover-up. British intelligence maintained a file labeled KV 24213, referencing Kurogane only once, in a briefing note. Joint Allied seizure of special U-boat cargo, custody dispute ongoing. The remainder of the file is redacted. By the 1960s, Kurogane had faded into rumor, yet Cold War intelligence chatter occasionally revived it. A CIA cable from 1964, intercepted in Saigon, described reports of biological stockpiles of German origin, allegedly used by Chinese advisors. The cable ends with the chilling note: source credibility uncertain, connection to iron shipments possible. What remains striking is how thoroughly the record diverges across nations. The Americans insist U-234's captured cargo was only uranium and jet parts. The Soviets insist they seized bioweapons shipments near Vladivostok. The Japanese sources imply Unit 731 was expecting precisely such deliveries. And yet, across all narratives, the codename Kurogane reappears, always associated with sealed containers, always erased from the final record. In 2003, divers revisiting the wreck of U-864 off Norway discovered sealed flasks still intact within the submarine. While the Norwegian government confirmed the presence of mercury used for weapons production, Local reports suggest divers encountered additional canisters too dangerous to surface. Radiation meters allegedly spiked during the recovery attempts, though officials denied contamination. The site was later entombed under layers of sand and concrete, officially for environmental safety. The truth of Kurogane lies in fragments, intercepted transmissions, half-redacted files, unexplained outbreaks. It remains unclear whether the Germans succeeded in delivering their iron cargo to Japan, or whether the shipments were captured and weaponized by the superpowers that inherited the war. But the implications are chilling. If even one Kurogane container survived, its contents may have entered the Cold War's shadow arsenals, tested in secret, unacknowledged in treaties, hidden under the cover of natural disease. The legacy of Nazi science did not end with jet engines and rockets. It may have bled into the invisible war of pathogens. Today, the name Kurogane rarely appears outside classified indexes. Yet in the silence of redacted archives, one fact remains. Somewhere between Berlin, Tokyo, and the oceans that swallowed them, a line of submarines carried cargo that history never accounted for. Cargo that may have reshaped battlefields without ever being seen. In March 1946, less than a year after Germany's surrender, a joint Anglo-American task force launched a covert mission into the Austrian Alps. The operation's codename was Harrow. Its stated objective, according to the surviving operational order filed at SHAF headquarters, was the recovery of sensitive enemy material. The order referenced intelligence supplied by captured SS officers who described a subterranean research site near Kaprun, buried beneath the Hohe range. What the task force discovered inside would never be entered into the official war record. The assault team consisted of 30 men from the US 45th Infantry Division, supported by British Special Air Service operatives. They moved under civilian cover, arriving at a disused hydroelectric plant on March 19th. Hidden access tunnels, camouflaged by rock slides, led into a vast underground facility reinforced with steel and concrete. According to the surviving field, a log, partially declassified in 1999, the complex contained laboratories, machine shops, and circular vaults housing unfamiliar electrical equipment. The log describes electromagnetic coils larger than any wartime apparatus the Allies had encountered, suspended over operating tables where cadavers were wired with electrodes. The men on site recorded their impressions with unease. One report, from Sergeant Robert Milner, states, "Multiple chambers filled with glass cylinders, residue inside, smell of rot and acid, some containers still sealed, human forms visible." Another entry from British Captain Alan Whitley reads, "This is not aviation research. This is anatomy married to machines." Photographic plates were allegedly taken, but never surfaced publicly. Instead, the equipment was dismantled under the supervision of technical officers and loaded onto trucks bound for Munich. Witness testimony suggests that much of it was later flown to the United States under the same channels as Operation Paperclip. The mission was not without consequence. Of the original team, 3 men died in unexplained accidents within weeks. One in a jeep crash, another from a sudden illness, a third from an alleged self-inflicted gunshot. Their deaths prompted rumors among surviving unit members that exposure in the tunnels had caused contamination or psychological collapse. By late 1946, every surviving officer was required to sign new secrecy oaths under the US Atomic Energy Act, despite the site having no obvious nuclear connection. A fragmentary after-action report filed under Harrow Final, 21st March 1946, was discovered in the US National Archives decades later. Nearly every line is redacted, but one sentence remains intact. Facility indicates experimental weaponization of human neurology via electromagnetic induction. What exactly that meant remains unclear. Some researchers have speculated that the site was connected to SS General Hans Kammler's secret programs. Kammler, who oversaw advanced weapons projects including the V2, disappeared in May 1945. His fate remains a mystery, but several intelligence reports place him in Austria during the war's final months. Soviet records add another layer. An NKVD field memo dated July 1946 describes Allied seizure of Alpine facility, possibly connected to Kamla. Rumors of mind interference weapons. The Soviets were denied access to the site, which fueled suspicions of Anglo-American concealment. By 1948, the Harrow unit had been quietly disbanded. Surviving members were reassigned, their service files scrubbed of any mention of the mission. One soldier, Corporal James Elwood, gave a sworn affidavit to his attorney before his death in 1972. In it, he described hearing a humming noise throughout the tunnels, even when generators were off. He claimed that some men complained of headaches, vertigo, and hallucinations. His statement ended with the line, "Whatever it was, it should never have been made." The alleged research itself, neurological manipulation using electromagnetic fields, resurfaced during the Cold War. Declassified CIA programs such as MKUltra and Artichoke pursued similar themes, though always denied any Nazi origin. Yet a 1952 Air Force memorandum titled Post-Harrow Technical Evaluation directly links the Austrian discoveries to subsequent behavioral influence studies. The memo remains heavily censored, but the connection is undeniable. Satellite imagery in the 1970s revealed collapsed tunnels in the Capron region, consistent with deliberate demolition. Austrian authorities insisted the area had been destabilized by hydroelectric projects. However, retired NATO engineers later admitted that charges had been placed to seal the tunnels in 1947, after Allied scientists concluded they were too unstable to study further. The physical evidence of Harrow is nearly gone, but scattered references persist. A British Foreign Office file, released under the 30-year rule, refers obliquely to equipment from Capron incorporated into classified defense research. In the US, Freedom of Information requests continue to reveal fragments, requisition forms for unidentified coils, procurement lists for neurological test apparatus, even payroll records linking former SS engineers to American defense contracts in 1947. For the men who entered the tunnels in March 1946, the memory never left. A diary recovered from Sergeant Milner's estate contains a final entry. "We carried out crates, but something stayed down there. Not machines, not men, something between." Today, the site lies buried under tons of rock, officially erased. The only surviving evidence is scattered across archives, most of it blacked out. Yet the fragments that remain suggest that Operation Harrow uncovered not simply advanced weapons research, but a program that blurred the line between biology and technology. Whether it was an early attempt at psychological warfare, crude cybernetics, or something stranger, the Allies ensured it would never be acknowledged. And yet, in the silence of the redactions, the outlines remain. A hidden laboratory in the Austrian Alps, coils humming in the dark, corpses wired to machines, a joint task, force sworn to silence, and a single phrase preserved in an otherwise censored report: weaponization of human neurology. The files close, the witnesses vanish, and the bunkers collapse into dust. Yet the silence feels deliberate, a silence that shields something too monstrous for daylight. Fragments surface, redacted lines, blurred photographs, half-burned orders, and each one hints at a history carved in secrecy, not in victory. In the end, it is not what we know that haunts us, but what remains hidden. A war without end, still echoing beneath the earth.